AI happens pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, it might just pass you by.
Hello, and welcome to The Reasoning Show. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and I'm joined by my co-host, Aaron Delp. Aaron, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Brian?
Aaron, today we have reason to believe that 2026 is going to be the year of AI agents. But what does that really mean? Well, we're going to explore that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by VENTION. AI promises speed, but for many teams, it means more meetings, more tools, more confusion, and still not much to show at launch. VENTION works differently. AI is embedded in their processes from the first architecture decision through deployment. Their engineers use AI to cut repetitive work and focus on what matters most, building the right product faster. This is their peace of mind promise. You get clear ownership, full visibility into progress, and delivery that you can rely on. Ready for an expert developer who actually delivers? Visit VentionTeams.com. We're back. Aaron, first show. Excited to be kicking this off. It feels like, a little bit of first day of school. We haven't had a first new show in 15 years, but excited to be doing this. Where are you joining us from, man? You're traveling a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm actually in Paris. As part of the day job. I do, at least right now, I do 1 week a month in Paris, which is, this is my fourth trip now, I think, since I've started with this company. But yeah, so I'm here pretty regular. So I'm not in my massive studio. I'm kind of on the traveling mic, and we're adjusting.
You sound good.
We're moving on.
Yeah, you sound good. You look good. We're going to kick off with, like I mentioned, I think what's probably a pretty important topic, and something that I think this format we're going to come back to on a pretty regular basis, maybe once every 6 months, once every 3 months. But we're going to talk about AI agents. And I'm going to start with this. We're 3.5 years into the generative AI era, give or take, right? ChatGPT launched. Why do you think AI agents or agentic AI is now getting so much attention?
So, first of all, I think it's just this natural progression, right? So if we kind of do the first generation of Gen AI, think of it as literally they could think. Right? Hey, I've got this model and I put a bunch of stuff in and I'm playing around with it and it thinks and it kind of reports something back. And now the agents is like, great, now I want it to do something, right? It's just natural human nature. It's like, oh, wow, this thing is so impressive. I want it to go act.
Yeah.
Right. And so this idea of go off and do something and report back to me, which is something we're going to dig into a little bit more. But, and also too, if we approach it from like business and enterprise business, that's where the ROI is today, right? Like there's a lot of companies out there. It's like, hey, I did this, a POC, I did something else on it. And oh, by the way, I've got a chatbot. How do you measure ROI on a chatbot? It's just harder to.
Right.
And so this idea of it does something, if it does something, I can report against that. I can put metrics against it and I can put business process.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think the technology's evolved. We now have a new set of pretty interesting agentic related technologies. And then, I think the other piece of it is, like you said, it's people have gone from a thought process around how do we augment the people doing stuff in our organization to how do we augment or super improve the processes around what we do. And whether those involve people or they involve agents or some combination, I think people have matured enough to where we're beginning to see that conversation happening. So, no, I think that's good. And I think, given that we're kicking off the show, I think agents is sort of a perfect place to sort of start, because it's going to touch everything. It's going to touch inference. It's going to touch reasoning. It's going to touch development models. It's going to touch user interfaces, economics, and a little bit of everything. Second thing I had on my list is we can make this real basic or we can make this real complicated. But if you were explaining to somebody, you get a chance to be in a room with a business leader, or you're speaking to a 12-year-old kid, doesn't matter. How would you explain AI agents to somebody, or how would you explain, why they exist or what they're supposed to do?
Yeah. So the easiest way is to compare and contrast them, right? So a lot of folks out there will have experience with a chatbot. And so my easiest way to think about this is a chatbot responds, but an agent acts. And so the whole idea is you give an agent, you say, go off and do something and come back, right? And so it has a goal, and it'll oftentimes break that into steps. And maybe those steps will go out to other agents, or maybe those agents or sub-agents will call tools, or maybe it goes and does a search, or there's APIs, or there's code execution. And then there's the whole idea of like evaluating that, looping on it, Is it done yet? Do I need to iterate on it again? But the key aspect here is autonomy. It's going off and doing something else. And it's like, hey, go do this and let me know when you're done. And then the other big thing for me that I think is super important with Agentic AI is the concept of memory, whether it's like, hey, you have a bunch of sub agents and they need to interact with central memory to, work on a project, or it's a project that happens over time. And so maybe the memory or the states need to be stored in a database or, some other place like that. So you can come back to it later and say, why did you do this? Or how did you do this? Or it needs to pick it back up and keep going with it again. But those are the biggest things. Like Gen AI is just a lot of times is just put something in, get an answer back.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, I want to play devil's advocate with that a little bit, just because we've seen this a million times in technology where a new concept comes out and a new term comes out, and people are kind of like, okay, let's define what it is. And the definitions are, occasionally they're very clear, but in many cases they kind of blur stuff. So let me just pull from some of the things you said. You said, okay, it's the difference between asking it something and then getting it to act. But you could argue that, like, if I ask ChatGPT or something to go off and build me a 50-page report, pulling in a bunch of stuff, like, that's acting, right? It's, I asked it for something and it acted and came back and gave me some things. It will occasionally come back and prompt me and say, hey, do you want some more new stuff? It can pull from sort of a concept of memory, having, looked at other things we've done. If those sort of gray areas come up from an agent perspective versus like, hey, I'm just interacting with this chatbot thing, should people think a whole lot about like how they're different, or is it really just a matter of thinking, okay, the technology's just evolved to become more about, less like a search engine, like the way that most people tend to use chatbots, and more like a process tool, right? You're defining a process, you're trying to introduce automation to a process or something. Like, is that a way to start to think? I'm trying to realize that, like, there's going to be gray areas.
Clarify it.
So, so yeah. Okay. Third thing I had on the list is so if you're thinking about AI agents, you're trying to explain stuff to people, or you're thinking about building something yourself, like, what are some of the core agents, some of the core questions you have to ask yourself, decisions you have to make, either before you get started or as you're working with some of these agents and systems and stuff?
Well, so first of all, at its highest level, there's, in my mind, two big things, and that is kind of defining the tasks. Like, if you're going to tell it to go off and act and go do something, well, you need to tell it what to go do. And this is where, we've heard things like prompt engineering comes into play, or like, basically, give it the conditions for success, give it some guardrails, hey, don't hallucinate your answers, go research everything, like little things like that, right? And that's a little bit of art and a little bit of science.
Yeah.
And then there's also this whole idea of how autonomous do you want it to be? How much do you trust it?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that is one of my biggest things right now, is this whole idea of like human in the loop and versus autonomous, right? But I mean, for those that are maybe newer to this, what does human in the loop even mean? So human in the loop is, okay, I'm going to tell it to go off and do something, and then it's going to come back and be like, hey, is this what you were looking for?
Yeah.
And you say yes or no. And so you're approving incremental steps as opposed to it just coming back at the end and going, hey, I'm done. Here you go.
Yeah, I think the other things that I tend to think about, so I think you're right. It's ultimately going to begin with defining tasks. I think for a lot of people that are software developers, that concept won't be very hard to wrap their head around, because they're very used to getting, a PRD or a spec or something that's may start off as being kind of abstract, and they have to start breaking it down into blocks that they can then write code against it. For non-developers, it's going to be a little bit interesting. Have you ever seen the thing that people will do sometimes, like kindergarten teachers will do it, like elementary school teachers will do it, where they'll go, okay, today we're going to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So I want you to explain to me what I have to do to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the kids will just go, well, you just put some peanut butter and jelly on bread and then you're done, right? And the teacher goes, okay, where did I find that stuff? How did I?
Yep.
So do I put the peanut butter
on? Do you put it on the outside? Do you put it on the inside?
Right. Do I use my finger to put that on there? How much do I put on there? Where did the peanut butter come from? Like, do I use one piece of bread? all that sort of stuff. And I think that's actually, it sounds a little bit silly, but it's probably a really good exercise for anybody who's like, okay, because I think we've probably all kind of gone through this or done a little bit of this mental exercise where you go, okay, if I wanted to augment what I do on a day-to-day basis, the first thing you probably want to do is go like, well, what do I do on a day-to-day basis? Like, how would I explain to somebody what I do? How would I map out what I do? Especially if you've got a job that's a little bit abstract or you do multiple things in a day, maybe you're not a bank teller or something. I feel like that's probably going to be the first step for a lot of people is figuring out like, you're going to probably start with something like an assistant to yourself or assistant to some task you have. And you're going to have to kind of go through that peanut butter and jelly exercise of being like, okay, what are the steps? What are the steps? Because otherwise, what you're going to run into is a lot of the system coming back to you and asking you questions. And that might be fine. Like it might come back and be like, hey, did you want red or blue? Do you want 6 or 7? Or do you want, whatever it is? I think that's going to be, I honestly think that's going to be the hardest thing for a lot of people. I think right now for developers, they struggle with stuff like, should I use LangChain or Crew AI or the latest cursor thing or whatever. But I think for regular people, it's going to be more like, can I figure out the process? And then when, like you said, when do you want human in the loop?
Yeah. Well, and the whole idea of that refinement of those prompts over time, or just defining the tasks over time. Mm-hmm. Like I'll give you a real world, for instance. So, I have, so again, traveling out of the country, I have some food stuff I have to deal with, like certain foods I can have and certain foods I can't have. And I've learned really quickly just to like snap pictures of my plate of food or snap pictures of menus or snap pictures of ingredients on products and be like, hey, does this have this in it or does this have this in it? And I've gotten it down to now have a project and I've written the prompt and fine-tuned the prompt. All I do is take a picture, I send it to the project, and it reports back exactly like, here's all the things, here's what's in it, here's what you need to, and it's like, But it took me a while to get there. Like it took me a couple months to get to it. Yeah. And that was that refinement process. And the first time I tried it, it was horrible. And I had to define everything and tell it everything, and it reported back wrong. And now I literally just take a picture and send it.
Right. Well, and I think you're highlighting the really important piece, which is there are going to be a lot of stuff you do with agents that you're going to want to call back to something repetitive, right? So, like always use, this, I don't know, this persona, this point of view of something like that, or, use this old thing that we do this thing that we did once that I don't want to have to rethink over again. It's kind of like, when you have to put like some sort of filter or something on your email, you're like, all right, I got to do tags and I got to do filters and but once you're done with it, then it's just there. You can call on it anytime you want to.
Yeah.
All right.
Now let me add one more to that though, because this is kind of the same way languages and frameworks is kind of an advanced topic. I think the concept of like, we talked about agents, but then we also talked about multi-agents, right? Yeah. This whole idea of like a swarm, if you will, right? Or like a master, supervisor agent, and then a bunch of other agents coming back, and then maybe they all compare the answers, or maybe there's like voting systems that happen or all these other things. The whole idea of like, hey, we got to get an agent working first.
Right.
And then multi-agent orchestration is a whole other level.
Right.
But that's where a lot of people very strongly believe like this is a whole bunch of, parallel tasks at once. And maybe it's the same tasks coming up with different ways or different answers and choosing the best, or maybe it's just, breaking a big task into a bunch of chunks. But I think that also is going to be huge.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that kind of stuff, the simplest way to think about that is just imagine any complex project in your job or, in your organization. Like how many different people are typically involved? What, a bunch of different domains are typically involved. How do they interact? And at some point, that stuff all comes back together and somebody or something holistically looks at it and goes, okay, I need this from here and I need this from here and I need this from here. And yeah, it's very interesting to sort of watch the earliest adopters start to kind of redefine or rebuild what sort of project management looks like, or group coordination, community stuff. And there's some interesting stuff in there. So The other thing I'll point out to people, we're only going to cover this for 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes like we do in a podcast. We've got a really good list of a bunch of very, very good resources that you can go pull from that'll be in the show notes, or there'll be a link in the show notes that point to a bunch of really kind of essential readings, essential viewing, some courses and videos that you guys can dig into, where to go explore these frameworks, what are some of the concepts to dig into. So we by no means feel like this is going to be something you're going to be an expert in agents in 30 minutes, but we did try to pull together for you a really, really good list of that, and that'll be linked in the show notes. You'll be able to dig into that after that. All right, a couple things kind of getting outside of the technology of this. At some point, and I saw it, I think I did a show on it a couple of weeks ago, people are going to ask, how much should I pay for one of these agents? Should I pay anything for them? But once they start doing some stuff that's valuable, people are going to start kind of comparing them to, well, if I pay, I don't know, whatever, let's say it costs you $4,000 or $5,000 a year to have a really robust thing versus what a human cost. Like how do you, have you given this any thought as to how you might think about it? Because it does always get into being, I feel like you tend to compare it to yourself first, like maybe what your salary is or what you think is value. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how businesses start thinking about it. Because again, we're really kind of always having this like, are we augmenting people? Are we augmenting a process? Or are we doing something, kind of from scratch, sort of AI native, if you will?
Yeah. So first of all, we're at this really weird point in the industry as we kind of move more into this. I foresee like, okay, up until now, it's almost been per seat pricing, right? In this like space of like, okay, you pay $10 a month or $200 a month or $2,000 a month or whatever. And you get a certain amount of use, but then you might get rate limited on the back end or whatever. And then I very much could see this being cloud economics all over again of like, since this is tasks that go off and run and you could have a bunch of different tasks, the whole idea of metered or consumption-based pricing, because I think a lot of folks, you can do it, hey, it's an outcome, like so many runs or some of these other things, but I don't think we're there yet. Like I almost feel like it has to go through this consumption model,
right,
to get to the outcome model.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what the outcomes are yet.
I think it's going to be. I think there's sort of two things going on at the same time. One of them is, if we look at history, we sort of have a sense of like how people have evolved to understand pricing, right? Like there's a reason why we always still talk about things as like t-shirt sizes. Oh, you want small, medium, or large, or sort of like free tier, entry tier, premium tier. Like we kind of grasp those concepts without necessarily understanding like, well, how much exactly is in those things? They sort of feel like, how committed do I want to be to something, right? So, and we've come to understand that pretty well, and it's easy for people that price stuff. It's easier for people that consume stuff. And the contrast to that is, like you said, we really don't have our head around yet, like what it means to interact with these things. Nobody, if you ask somebody like, hey, you made that thing, whether it was like you wrote some code or you created a document or whatever it was, like if you ask somebody like, how many tokens did that take? They're not going to have any clue, right? Like they're not going to have any clue of like, they might be able to tell you like at the end, it took 1 billion tokens or 1 million tokens. But if somebody said like, hey, what's 1 million tokens get me? Until we start having some immediate things that come to mind. And then at the same time, we don't yet have any concept of being like, well, how much more should I iterate on this? Like, if it's free, I guess I could keep iterating on it. But once the meter starts running, then you start getting psychologically a little bit gun shy about being like, all right, is that next one valuable enough to spend time and money on it? Or is it good enough? And I think until we have some easy ways to explain how AI pricing works, right now, yeah, per seat is pretty easy. But how many, like, think about it this way, like how many people have you run into that they're like, yeah, I pay for whatever service it is. And, maybe they're at $20 a month, $30 a month, and they're starting to get value out of it. And they're like, man, at this point, yeah, I'd give you $100 a month. I'd give you two, like they're quickly like, I don't want to run out of tokens because that might end their day, right? I got to wait till the next iteration. And I think
I'll give you a practical example, although maybe I shouldn't tell on my kids, but I'm going to tell on my kids. So my kids may or may not have multiple AI subscriptions, because when it's test time and exam week and they're in crunch time and doing a lot of work and playing with it a lot, they'll run into the limits and then they're done for the day or they're locked out for however many hours or whatever. So then they just switch to the other one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So they have backup. My kids have backup AI systems.
Yeah. No, I guarantee every kid does. I know my daughters have run into that stuff. So,
and it only happens during, like big exam weeks or big project weeks or whatever. And then the rest of the time, they don't need it as much. So, yeah, it's real world.
I think it's going to be really interesting. I think we're going to see, I got to imagine every event you'll go to, whether it's an entire track or there'll be talks that are like, here's how you should, here's how much you should pay for it. Should you even worry about paying for it? Should you worry about outcomes instead? And like great outcomes more valuable than saving whatever. And yeah, I think we're going to get into some very, very interesting stuff there. Last question I have, you and I have talked about this a little bit on the show. We've talked about it a little bit offline. Like, how are you expecting to use agents in your day-to-day work? And maybe more importantly, like, how do you expect kind of wider spread adoption to impact enterprise businesses?
Yeah. So first of all, I think you almost have to make this little bit of a table of like, okay, is it an internal use or is it an external use?
Yep.
Is it, you're, I don't know, saving something in IT or saving something in legal or something else like that. So the whole idea of like, I'm saving time, I'm saving, money to the business versus the classic generating new revenue or something else like that. But there's also external ways, like, customer service chatbot, right? Well, the biggest thing I've seen so far is enterprises broadly are using the internal use cases now because if it doesn't touch customer-facing processes, it's not as big of a liability. It may not be as big of a compliance thing. I may not have as, audit things I have to go through. And I can just kind of play with it internally. And if it blows up, it blew up internally.
Right.
But what'll happen is once we master those use cases, I think we will start to see, like, what was that classic example of like the guy that talked the car dealership chatbot into selling him a car for
$1? Yeah.
For $1 or whatever, right? Like, yeah, you can't just roll that shit out like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting from a couple of ways. I think, Brandon Wichard mentioned this on the show last week. He's like, this is still very much bottoms up technology, right? Which I tend to agree with. It's like, if you're willing to jump in, if you're willing to play with it, if you've got access to some tools, like you can do some pretty powerful stuff if you spend a decent amount of time on it. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch kind of like how intra-company dynamics exist for, people who are just like, man, I'm going to get out running out in front of my job, out in front of my group. I'm going to, kind of set themselves apart, which I think, if you talk to most managers is something they would encourage. I think what's going to be the counter to that that's going to be very interesting is we still haven't seen an easy way to leverage AI in general, but then agents, will evolve as well. Like, how do you do those in the sort of team way or the organization way or the BU way or whatever that enterprises tend to be organized around, right? Like enterprises tend to be organized around the idea that like the enterprise exists, succeeds, extends itself forever, regardless of the people that are there, because the processes will remain. And right now it feels like AI is going to, kind of run roughshod over the top of that. So I think the two of those things are going to have some interesting conflicts over the next couple of years until some best practices come along or people adapt to it and they're like, okay, this is the new, it's kind of like when IT became very distributed. It was like, okay, well, this is the new, shadow IT plus whatever. I think we're going to see a lot of that is going to be confusing, but also, a lot of people like, hey, look what my group did, which was really just, Aaron doing stuff on his own.
Yep. Agreed.
So, all right, man. Well, I think we're going to wrap up there. So for anybody listening, if this is your first show for Reasoning, welcome. If this is you extending from the Cloudcast to Reasoning, welcome again. We're glad you stuck with us. A couple of basic things. You shouldn't have to change anything for getting the show. You're probably already listening to this, but a couple of real basic things. The old Cloudcast website will probably stay up for a while. We're still paying for that domain and stuff. But the new show will be at reasoning.show. So www.reasoning.show. Your podcast player will automatically update. You won't have to do anything. And we are working through through just a few little bugs and glitches and stuff, getting the rest of the social media stuff kind of pulled over. But it should be in the footer of the show notes for wherever you get your podcast every week. And it'll also be out on the website as well. So bear with us. Give us a week or so to work through a few little glitches that we hadn't anticipated, but everything else should just flow naturally. We're glad you're here. We're excited you're here. show@reasoning.show. If you want to send us a note, send us some feedback, send us some suggestions for guest ideas or anything along those lines, you can reach us that way. So, Aaron, with that, any last thoughts on kicking off a new show?
No, the only last thought was I didn't even think of that, the show at thecloudcast.net, and then it's show@thereasoning.show.
Show@reasoning.show. Yeah, a little funny there. It's like a palindrome, It's just show on
I was
both
like,
sides.
Wow.
So,
I guess that is. Yeah.
Maybe we'll make a feedback at reasoning.show just to make it simpler. But yeah, show@reasoning.show. Give that a shot. Would love to hear your feedback. Would love to hear your ideas. And the other thing, there is if you go to the website, if you go to reasoning.show on the web, there's a button to subscribe to the newsletter. So we're going to try and get that cranked up. Probably first issues going out around April timeframe. Get a few people signed up. So if you get a chance, we'd love to hear that. If you could get a chance to give us a rating, 5 stars preferred, out on wherever you listen to your podcast, that would be fantastic as well. Tell the world about this new thing we got going on. All right, with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Check us out online at reasoning.show for all things reasoning. And leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to the show.